has given us. Okay, so we are in the book of Matthew today, and we're going to be reminded of that very clearly today, that we need to be paying attention to the one with whom we're in a relationship and never get into fear. Just let's get that out of the way right away. Never give in to fear. Jesus has some very blunt words to share with his disciples about the fact that they should not get into fear. And so we're going to pay attention to that. We are in the book of Matthew today, chapter 8, the last part of the chapter, and it is going to, starting with verse 23 through 34, and the title I've got today is Confronting Life's Storms as a Disciple. Okay, confronting life's storms as a disciple. Now, if you aren't a disciple, you can confront life's storms in whatever way seems best to you. There's ways that people confront storms. We all know the stories of the 1929 stock market crash, and there were people who confronted that storm in a variety of different ways, some of them by jumping off buildings, because that's the way that they confronted the storm. But that's not an option for God's people. Other people cowered or got into greed or got into whatever. That's not how God's people confront storms. God's people confront storms by standing firmly on the rock, who is Jesus Christ. So we are looking today at confronting life's storms as a disciple. First thing that I want to look at is a map, because we just need to understand where we are. Okay, we know we're somewhere in Israel. That's always good whenever we're talking about when Jesus is ministering. But it's very helpful today to recognize that where Jesus was in northern Israel, that's Judea way on the lower left. Samaria is that middle area on the left there where the Jewish people really wouldn't go. Then there was Galilee. And then to the right of Galilee, just not all the way to the top of it, of the Sea of Galilee, but there's what's called the Decapolis, that whole area on the right. Jesus' ministry was in Capernaum, and that was his base of operations. Today, the area that is in focus is Gadara, and we're dealing with a man who was called the Gadarene Demoniac, because of the fact that Gadara, which is not on the sea, you'll notice, was in charge of that area. Okay, so it was kind of their area of responsibility. They have coins from Gadara which show a seashore. Well, if you'll notice, Gadara ain't on a seashore, but it was in charge of that area of the Sea of Galilee. So that was on the coins to show their responsibility for that different thing. Just for reference, way down on the bottom is Jerusalem, so you get the idea of where everything is. And then today, the first part of the story, Jesus is taking a boat, and he's going to cross over, and I can almost guarantee that Jesus was going to be crossing over to that area to the north of Hippos. He was going to be going into areas that would not be completely Gentile. However, the storm blew them southeast, that we're going to read about in just a minute. So you get the idea of what's going on with the landscape right now. So, starting with Matthew chapter 8, verses 23 to 25, we're going to see what it means to live as a disciple in the midst of the storms. It says, when he boarded the boat, and remember last time, he had said, two people had come up and said, I'll follow you. Or he asked them, follow me. And one said, let me bury my dead. And he said, no, you got to come with me now. And someone else said, I want to follow you. And he said, I don't have a place to lay my head. But we're never told if they really do follow. But he does have disciples following. It says, when he boarded the boat, his disciples followed him. The true disciples followed him. Suddenly, a violent storm whipped up the sea so that the boat was swamped by the billowing waves. But Jesus continued sleeping. His disciples came and woke him, crying, Lord, save us, we are foundering. And if you aren't someone who has ever lived by a seashore, foundering is not good. It's another word for we are being swamped and we are sinking. And if you're in the midst of a raging storm, it's not a good thing to be. So Jesus had said to the disciples, follow me, and the ones that were with him followed him. We talked about that last week. And while they're crossing, and you'd think, by the way, that Jesus said, follow. If we get in the boat with him, we're fine. Somehow we think that sometimes. Hey, come to Jesus and he'll help solve all your problems. Sometimes it's the fact that you're coming to Jesus that causes most of your problems. Because he's working on you. He's working on the people. Not everyone's going to be happy that you come to Jesus. There's a guy named Satan. He really is not happy that you've come to Jesus. And so he likes to throw everything but the kitchen sink at brand new Christians so that they will be cut off in their faith and their joy and their ability to serve the Lord. He'll throw everything he can at them, and that's why we need to learn to stand in faith and prayer and all of that very early in our Christian walk, because otherwise we might be taken out. And what I mean by taken out is miss our calling and purpose because we duck and hunker down. We say, maybe it'll go away if I just keep my head down. We have not been called to keep our heads down. We've been called to stand up. Well, they're crossing over. They've got the challenges. It doesn't guarantee the absence of challenges. It says this storm comes up. Matthew uses the word seismus for earthquake. In fact, I saw one translation when I'm going through my commentaries. One of the commentators also does a translation himself as he is doing his commentary in the same way that I do it. And he actually called it an earthquake in the sea because the word is seismus. However, that's not quite accurate. If we hear about an earthquake in the sea, we're thinking it's an earthquake underneath the sea, and that's not going to do much on the top to begin with. This was what was known, very common in that area, because Galilee is 600 feet below sea level. It's surrounded by hills and ravines, and because of the temperature changes at night, suddenly the winds could rush down from the higher levels, and they just turn the sea into a cauldron. And that's what's being described. It's the sea shaking and the wind blowing. And it was so bad, it began to swamp the boat. Now, remember that at least some of these disciples, and there was more than one boat, we know that from the book of Mark, at least some of these disciples were experienced fishermen. It means living in boats on the sea was their way of life. Which means by the time they panicked, they had determined they were about to die. They didn't wake Jesus up for the early part of the storm. I'll let him sleep. We can handle this. Suddenly, there's water pouring in from all sides. Things are happening. It's really bad. And these guys have lived by the seashore. They have dragged the dead bodies of their comrades out of the water who have been caught in storms like this. And they realized this is not a great thing. So it says they finally decided they needed to wake him. Can you imagine in the midst of this storm? You're thinking, you're working, you're bailing, you're doing whatever you need to do, rowing like crazy, and you look back and he's sleeping soundly. Now, number one, that does speak about his tiredness. He has really been pouring out as he ministered to people. So it speaks about his tiredness, but boy, we're talking, they had to be looking back there, and they finally said, we got to wake him because we're going down. And so they jump back and they say, Lord, save us. We are going down. We are foundering. That is what they thought was happening. And they were wrong. They didn't know they were wrong. They were allowing their fears to direct them. And so Jesus deals with it. He responded to them, you have little faith. Why are you acting like cowards? Now, Then he got up and rebuked the wind and the sea, and an exceptional calm descended on the sea. The men were amazed and said, what sort of man is this that even the winds and the sea obey him? So, Jesus said, oh, you of little faith, why are you acting like cowards? That's like, these are burly fishermen, some of them. And they'd never been called a coward in their lives. And the one they're calling rabbi and master says, "You're acting like cowards." And they thought they were acting rationally. And he says, "You're acting like cowards," because he was in the boat. And he had said, "Follow me." It's the same thing as when Peter was walking on the water and Jesus said, "Sure, come on out." And he's walking on the water, and the only reason he could walk on the water is because Jesus said, "Follow me, come on out." And then Peter allowed the circumstance of the wind and the waves to take his eyes off Jesus, and he began to sink. And I'm not going to call that cowardly, simply because I think it was an amazing, brash, and brave act of courage to be able to step out of the boat that he was in. But then he let the circumstance, and we all understand this. I mean, I can't imagine getting out of the boat. And yet, he was able to do that. Here, he had, he was certainly among those who were being challenged by Jesus. He says, "You have little faith." We'll talk about that in just a couple of minutes. But he was saying because of the fact they didn't recognize on the rock on whom they were standing, they were not living up to who they're supposed to be. And that made them cowardly. That's interesting. Now, by the way, some of your translations don't translate it as cowards. They say, "Why are you afraid?" The word means coward. They're trying to soften it a little bit. Jesus says, "Why are you cowards?" Then he got up and he did the rebuking of the wind and the waves. We see in Mark that he addressed the wind and the waves a little bit more. It says, when he woke up, he rebuked the wind, "Stop howling." He also said to the sea, "Muzzle yourself." So the wind ceased and an exceptional calm descended on the sea. Okay, so that's the rebuke that he gave them. Stop howling and muzzle yourself. And it stopped howling and the wind muzzled itself. And then the disciples were really afraid. And what sort of man is this that the wind and the sea obey him? Actually, in the book of Mark, it says, they were really afraid when the storm was on them. And after the storm and they saw what Jesus did, it said they were terrified. Because they're looking at this guy going, "Oh, who do we got in the boat with us?" And they'd just been called cowards too, so that couldn't have helped a whole lot. But they're figuring if the guy knows how to calm the wind and the waves, he probably was accurately describing who we are right now. And who wants to be a coward, right? So, okay, let's talk about that little faith. Let's talk about the marks of little faith. Remember, there's three types of faith. There's little faith, there's regular faith, and there's great faith. And we've been called to live in faith. But boy, when we live in little faith, it has an impact on us. And the marks of little faith, it's a problem only for those who know God. Because those who don't know God have no faith. So little faith is our issue. It's even among those who should know better. The disciples should have known better, and yet all through, I've got all these examples up there of times Jesus said they had little faith because they didn't live up to what they knew about God. So little faith manifests as worry. That's Matthew 6 when Jesus is saying, "Don't worry, the Lord takes care of the lilies and feed the birds." And if that's how he takes care of them, you should figure out it's only faith to recognize he's going to take care of you because you're worth far more to him than the lilies and the birds. So he says to them, you have little faith if you're worried about your sustenance. Oh, that speaks, doesn't it? It's pretty obvious right now we're going into a time of inflation. We're going into a time of, supply chain issues that may make food even more expensive. And the first thing we start to do is we start to get a little shifting a little bit. Maybe a little nervous, because we're thinking, well, how are we going to do this? How are we going to do that? That's little faith. Planning is not little faith. The Lord saying to you, or letting you know far enough in advance that you can start adding rice and beans or whatever very inexpensively just to be able to stretch your budget in the future, that's wisdom. That's not freaking out, though. That's just simply saying, I'm going to put together a plan of what I can afford. I'm not going to max out my credit cards. I'm going to trust that the Lord's going to help me put things together. And remember, we had Rick Joyner on that video. He looked at people, Rick looked at his congregation as he was talking about this about a month ago. And he said, I've been talking about this since 2000. And I just found out that some of you have done nothing. And then he makes this comment about the fact that they might be fasting in the future. He was getting them moving. to be able to start to stock up. It's pretty cheap to stock up, honestly, because rice and beans is still cheap. And, you may not like rice and beans, but as long as you get enough spice. There's this great spice that I learned about from Joel. It's a little blasphemous on Mother's Day, but it's called Slap Your Mama. I'm just saying. You put that on rice, man, it's wonderful. Anyway, so it now graces our table too, and it's the Hagen's fault. Just wanted to point that out. But okay, so you do stuff like that. You make sure that you can store it, and that stuff, you get a little bit of rice, it goes a long way, so you can really stock up. So we don't have to worry. We may have to plan because we don't want our budgets affected so much that we have to, go out and get on government assistance and stand in line all day and, do whatever they do. I stood in line once for government cheese when I was in college. I was so embarrassed. But my friends had said, I'll go along. And, they gave you government cheese. It really was government cheese. It was Velveeta. I went, they even sell fake cheese, and they give you a cheese. So anyway, did that. That was the last time. But, okay, that's why they call it government cheese, by the way, because that's what they used to give out, cheese. So he says, don't worry. Don't be afraid. That's what we have right here. This is Matthew 8, the one we're talking about. It manifests in fear. People get into major fear and panic. By the way, panic's illegal for us because we're standing on the rock. Where we focus on our circumstance, that's Peter sinking into the waves after having this amazing miracle happen for him. Not remembering our past supernatural interventions. This is the Matthew 16 when the disciples are in the boat with Jesus after he's fed the 5,000 and the 4,000 by multiplying bread. And Jesus says, hey, you really need to make sure that you don't have that yeast of the Pharisees and the Sadducees working in you. And the disciples go, oh no, he knows we forgot lunch. And Jesus looks at them and says, don't you remember about the 5,000 and the 4,000? You have little faith? I'm talking about something entirely different, and you guys are thinking I'm concerned that you forgot to bring bread? And then, of course, Matthew 17 shows us the lack of power. The disciples could not cast out a demon that Jesus had given them the authority to do because they didn't have the faith for it for whatever reason. So those are the marks of little faith. So that's why we don't want to have little faith, because none of those things are. I don't find in these like the fruit of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, or self-control. I don't see those in these things. I see the opposite, things that we don't want to manifest. So here, what's the marks of great faith? Faith is living up to your level of experience of God. I mean, you just know who God is, and you can realize, oh, he takes care of me. He's promised to take care of me. I can read the Bible. I can find out what he says. That's faith. Great faith is what the centurion and the Syrophoenician woman did. Both of them were not Jewish. So for them, their concept of God was marred by their false teachings, and they had risen above that, and they started to understand more about the true God, and so they were able to live above their level of experience of God, but not presumptuously. If you get up on this roof right now and say, I think God will protect my, I can jump off and it won't hurt my feet, that's presumption, and you're going to end up going to the hospital if you live. No. If you have to jump because there's a fire or something like that, I'd be praying, Lord, your angel says, give me, and you'll end up in a tree, even if it's one of those way over there. How do you get over there? Must have been a gust of wind. Okay, but that's different than presumption. There's a need, there's an emergency, there's something going on. We don't build presumptuously. Here's presumption. I'll tell you right now in our current context. I have been warned by the apostolic head of our ministry stream that it might be good to stock up just in case things are really worse than what people think. But I'm going to say God will provide for me because he promises, so I don't have to stock up anything. That's not great faith. That's presumption. Because God has given us the ability to be able to plan and respond. I mean, just like if you were a farmer in Israel, you had to go out and plant seed in order to get a harvest at the end of the year. The harvest may have been amazingly miraculous, but if you didn't plant those seeds, that harvest wasn't going to be there at all. Because God uses our efforts. We cooperate with him to be able to see the harvest come in. So it's humility. I mean, we see that in the Syrophoenician woman and the centurion. Both of them said, no, Lord, I don't deserve you to come under my roof. The Syrophoenician woman says, Lord, you can call me a dog all you want. I don't care. I just want what you have. And then persistence. Boy, the lady certainly showed that. She just kept after him until the disciples were so embarrassed. That's the marks of great faith. But we're not even called to live in great faith. We're called to live in faith. And that releases power in our lives. The disciples missed that in this particular. By the way, I'm not throwing stones at them. I don't think we'd have done any better. Honestly. They were well-worn fishermen, if you will, who understood the sea, and they looked at everything and said, they rationally decided. This was rational. It wasn't irrational. It was totally rational. They looked at the circumstance and they said, we're all going to drown. They looked at things. They understood. This is bad and it's bad. There's no hope. And so they reached a rational decision and said, we need to wake him up in a bit of a rush. And then Jesus called them cowards after they made a rational decision. Because it was irrational. Because he was in the boat. If he was the Messiah, the Father wasn't going to let him drown. That's why it was irrational. So now, how do we walk as disciples through the storms of life? Not with cowardice. That's what we've just been told. Not with little faith. That's just what we've been told. So Jesus gets to the other side after they were blown off course a bit. And they run right into another storm. And this was a big one too. When he arrived on the other side of the lake in the country of the Gadarenes, 2 demonized men came out from the tombs and met him. They were extremely violent, so that no one had the ability to travel on that road. That's pretty violent. So we've got these demon-possessed guys. By the way, here's the Sea of Galilee. Left is north, to the right is south. Looking across from the Galilean side, and you see Hippos. That Hippos is where the start of the Decapolis was. The Decapolis is that area of the Gentile 10 cities. That's what Decapolis means, 10 cities. And then to the left would have been Israel. They didn't get to, or not Israel, but an area that was not the Decapolis. And then to the right is the Decapolis. You can see where Gadara is. That's over that whole administrative area. You get an idea about the topography. Very rugged. And so they're heading across, and they get across to that particular area. This is from sea level, so you get an idea, that this is a fairly substantial hilly area in that region that they are stepping into. The tombs would have been obvious because of the fact that you could cut into the hillside, the tombs. That's why he was around the tombs, around the hillsides. So when he arrived on the other side of the lake, he ran into another storm, and the other storm was in the form of 2 violently demonized men. The other Gospels, Mark and Luke, only focus on one of them. One of them became a missionary to the Gentiles in the area of the Decapolis. And that's the one that they focused on, the one that wanted to come with him. And Jesus says, no, you go and be a missionary to the Gentiles. You're a Gentile, and you go out and you minister to the Gentiles. And so that became the first missionary to the Gentiles. But it was a Gentile ministering to the Gentiles and talking about what God had done for him. So Mark and Luke focus on that one, and Matthew shares that there were 2 of them. We see this between the gospel writers. Blind Bartimaeus, there were 2 of them. But some of the gospels, we only hear about blind Bartimaeus because he was the one that was the most significant. And adding the second one wouldn't have added anything to the story. So in that healing. So that's a common feature. So you got these 2 demonized guys. They're a mess, and they are, they're violent, and so no one would go that way. And that's where Jesus and his disciples show up, to an area that no one will go. Isn't that normal for disciples? You go to an area that no one else will go. By the way, you will be called to areas that no one else will go when you're serving Jesus, because he wants to go to those areas and help people. And so he calls us to them. In the book of Mark, we hear more about these guys. The man made his shelter among the tombs because it was no longer possible to bind him, even when they used chains. For he had often been bound with shackles and chains, but he tore the chains apart and smashed the shackles. This is violently, powerful. No one was strong enough to restrain him. As a result, night and day, he continually cried out among the tombs and in the hills, even cutting himself with sharp stones. This is not a very balanced individual, but that's demonized. Remember, we've talked about demonization. You can be demonically harassed. That's the 3 o'clock in the morning wake-up call, and the enemy starts accusing you of everything. That's the voice. By the way, what do demonic voices sound like? Your thoughts, except they're accusing. When the Holy Spirit convicts you, it still sounds like your thoughts. But it's the Holy Spirit's, when he brings us conviction, it's a far different thing. There's actually hope of change that can be released in us when the Holy Spirit is involved. So when you're listening to a spirit, it always sounds like our thoughts. It's just the tenor of the thoughts can be different. So demonic harassment is when we can be harassed by the voices outside of us. Demonic oppression means those voices never leave us. Demonic possession means you pretty much are a condominium and they are in control of your body because you've given yourselves over to them. And this guy had given himself over to them. By the way, the book of Enoch, in the book of Enoch, which is not a scriptural book. In fact, if you read the book of Enoch, you can see that there's some things about it that make it mark it as unscriptural. It doesn't mean Enoch didn't write it. It simply means that it was amended over time so that now you don't know what he wrote and what he didn't write. So that's why we can't make it a part of the canon, because it's just not that level. But in the book of Enoch, it's clear that in the worldview of that book, no matter who wrote it, that demons were the disembodied souls of the Nephilim. And in that viewpoint, the angels, the fallen angels, made themselves corporeal, and they were able to mate with women and created the Nephilim, who were, the giants in the earth. And when they died, they were kind of like, they couldn't go to paradise or Abraham's bosom, and they didn't go to the other holding place for people because they weren't people. They were something else, a hybrid. And so as a result, they wandered arid places looking for bodies to inhabit. I'm just telling you the viewpoint. We'll find out when Jesus comes again. Okay. There's different schools of thought on it. But at least you understand, if you ever hear of anyone saying this is what they are, you'll understand, that's where they got it from. And whether it's true or not, the person may say it with a great deal of confidence, but whether it's true or not, we don't know. And so we just have to recognize the majority of Christians believe they're fallen angels of the lower rank. So, okay, you pays your money, makes your choice. So now you've got these two demonized guys running into Jesus. He comes to him and meets him, and they, because when they come to meet him, do you think they're coming with their hands out, stretched to shake hands? No. He thought, here comes some travelers. I am going to come and harass them, because that's what he did. No one could pass that way. So these two guys are coming for a violent encounter, and they probably expected to clean the clock of everyone that had just gotten off the boat. But as they got close, they suddenly realized, It says they suddenly cried out and said, "Why are you harassing us, Son of God? Have you come here to torment us before the set time?" They ran into someone they didn't expect to run into. And as a result, they responded. Why are you harassing us? Because we're told in the book of Mark, he was commanding them to leave already. As they got into the place, he started to say, "Get out of them." They were responding, they didn't want to get out of them. And so there was a little bit of a tussle going on. And when it is apparent that when Jesus was doing exorcisms, he was going to win. But he was also very concerned for the people involved, because the demons could cause damage as they were leaving. That's part of the negotiations that's coming up. And so as he was working with them, it's kind of like surgery. You have to start getting them out of the areas where they could cause damage in the individual. And as Jesus is working with them, they say that's harassment. Jesus is exercising his authority. And so they say, "Why are you harassing us, Son of God?" Now notice they didn't say, "If you are the Son of God," like Satan did. They just recognized right away, this is the Son of God. They, by the way, weren't in the same, stature as Satan. And so while Satan would make sure that he could do what he does, did God really say? These guys just blurted out. They're not as clever as Satan. So, why are you harassing us? Have you come to torment us before the set time? That means there's a time coming. What was tormenting to them? Being driven out of these bodies. And so there's a set time when all of their authority and power is going to disappear. And that is going to be the time when Jesus comes and sets up his kingdom in person. And anytime we show up and take authority over them, that set time was to them something that they didn't need to submit to yet. And so they're asking Jesus, why are you here already? We want to continue doing the work that we were doing. And Jesus did not let them. There were a herd of many pigs grazing. Oh, they got crazy. There were a herd of many pigs grazing a distance from them. The demons begged him, asking, if you drive us out, send us into the herd of pigs. Remember, they're in the Decapolis. They could raise pigs in the Decapolis. I don't think their bacon would have been as good as what we got today. But they could raise pigs in that area of the country. So the pig, by the way, the other gospels say there were 2,000 of them. This is a lot of bacon on the hoof. And they're a distance away. So they're far enough away that they weren't immediately involved with what was going on. And they were far enough away because, remember, those demons didn't let anyone pass by that way. And so they had to be far enough away that the demons did not harass them over there. The demons had a predicament. Jesus was telling them they needed to go, and they didn't want to be just cast out into the what's called arid places where they had no place to impact the world. It's clear that they needed a body in order to have interaction in the world in which they live, and so they wanted bodies. They needed a vessel to be able to impact or interact with what's going on around here. So they said, hey, send us into the herd of pigs. Now what they're saying is, we will leave peaceably if you just let us go to the pigs. Now let's talk about the ethics of this. Someone owned those 2,000 pigs. Where's their property rights? What Jesus was demonstrating that those two men were worth far more than any number of pigs. That's what Jesus was demonstrating. Human beings are worth far more than animals. And the ethics of it, he's the Son of God. He owns everything. And so for him, it wasn't even a question. This was a shortcut to get them to leave. Now, once they got into the pigs proved to be poor vessels. They went insane. He responded to them, go, and when they went out, they went into the pigs, and suddenly the entire herd rushed headlong down the steep incline into the lake, and they drowned in the water. We saw those clips. And those who were watching over them fled. There's a play on words in I think it's Mark, where it says, don't send us to the abyss. Then the Greek word's abyssus. And then it says pigs rushed down the cliff into the abyssus, because that's what the water was called, the abyssus. So there's a real play on words that what they didn't want, they got anyway, because they got into some pigs, and the pigs went crazy because of the fact that they didn't know what was going on. The demons were raging, mean, and spiteful, and the pigs went and, drowned themselves. So Jesus did send the demons out. He said, go. The pigs could not handle it. And can you imagine the caretakers? They had one job. Take care of the pigs. They're just happily watching what's going on. I wonder what's going on over there. Those two demonized people they're taking out. Oh, look at that. All of a sudden the pigs start rioting. It's like, what? And they watch them. Can you imagine the horror? Now, by the way, this is more than one guy, because this is 2,000 pigs. And all of a sudden they start rushing down, and they're going to try to stop it, but they can't, because the pig, you don't get in front of a pig. I had a friend who was driving down in a Camaro once down a country road, and a pig jumped out in front of him, and he hit him. And he ends up sideways in the road, shaking, wondering what's going on. He's going, where's the pig? And all of a sudden he hears this squealing, right? And the pig is, all of a sudden his car is shaking because he's on top of the pig. And the pig rolls him off and gets up and runs down the road. And he told us this story, and we're like, okay, don't mess with pigs. So so now you got 2,000 of these things. And these guys are trying to stop them. You know, when you got a herd of pigs, they are, as long as they're amicable, you can herd them. But when they go insane, you get out of the way. And so the caretakers got out of there and they were watching, they left. They saw their pigs run into the water and they're like, okay, we got to tell our owners about this before our owner takes this out of our paycheck. So they went into the city and they reported everything, including what had happened to the demonized men. Incredibly, the whole city came out to meet Jesus. This is big news. When they saw him, they begged him that he would depart from their borders. So they were reporting to the citizens of the city, let us tell what happened, and you can count on the fact that the owners were there, but they were getting the support they needed, so the owners wouldn't take it out of there, hide. So when they also told what happened to the demonized man, and the entire city and the leadership came out. Now, it doesn't mean every single individual, but the majority came out to see, because this is big news. These two demonized guys are now not demonized anymore. This is huge news, and it's huge news because 2,000 pigs is a lot of pigs to lose. That affects the local economy. So they're all coming out because they're wondering, how did this horrible disaster happen? And when they came out to meet Jesus, it says they begged him that he would depart their borders because they were afraid. You know, in the book of Mark, it says that the disciples, after the storm was calm, they were more terrified of who he was after the miracle. Same thing here. They were very terrified when Jesus demonstrated he had authority over these demonized individuals. And so they begged him to leave. Now, what Matthew doesn't share is one of the guys wanted to go with him. He wanted to get in the boat and just go with him. And that was the guy that Jesus sent back as a missionary to the Decapolis. So when we're walking as a disciple during the storms of life, we always have opportunity. We have opportunity to stand encouraged with Jesus, or we have the ability to cower in fear with little faith. Those are our options. And as we continue forward into the shaking which is being released in the world in which we live. And I will let you know why we're having a shaking in the world in which we live. Because the presence of Jesus Christ always shakes the mountains. And the government structures and the world structures are the mountains of this world. And Jesus is drawing closer and closer through his people. And the very evidence of the shaking is reminding us that he is getting closer and closer. And the shaking is only going to get worse, not better. But we're with the ones who's causing the one who is causing the shakings. It'd be irrational to be afraid of them when they are exactly what is needed to get the world to repent and to be able to further his kingdom. So we have to make a determination right now. Are we going to be like the disciples and we're saying, oh my goodness, it's awful? Are we going to be like the people of the city saying, oh my goodness, this could hurt the economy? Or are we going to be God's people and say no matter what comes, he's going to watch over us and we're going to stand with him? Well, you know what the answer is supposed to be to that. And so let's do that. Let's pray. Jesus, I thank you for showing us clearly in this section of Scripture the things of your power so that we would know how to respond to them. I ask that we would always walk with you through the storms we see being unleashed in our culture with confidence, with faith, and with expectation. You yourself said, when you see these things happening, lift up your head, for your redemption is drawing nigh. You did not see your people cowering or being afraid. You saw them lifting up their heads with expectation. And I ask that we would be those people. In your name, amen. Thank you. And the fact that Joel's not up here means that there are no ministry teams, correct? Okay. And Joel, several of the women have expressed interest in talking to you about your spice choices. Have a great day. Those of you that have family that you're celebrating with, have fun. Happy Mother's Day to those who are streaming. And you have a great week. We'll be back Friday night at 7:30 p.m., next week Sunday at 10 a.m. as we continue our study of the book of Matthew. God bless. And everyone here, enjoy your time. And there's no other anything? Okay, here we go. Enjoy.